After the AAIB's preliminary report into the Air India AI-171 crash, there are more questions than answers, and now there is greater focus on what regulators knew and when they knew. The preliminary probe report confirmed that both engines were functioning at takeoff. They shut down only seconds later, after both fuel control switches were found in the cutoff position. But viewers, it appears nearly 10 years ago, the UK had put out a safety notice urging all operators of Boeing planes to inspect their fuel shutoff valves. And this alert was given even before the FAA advisory, which came out in 2018, which reiterated the same concern. India's probe report also clearly states that this advisory from FAA back in 2018 was not followed by Air India or other airlines, as it was not mandatory. However, this begs a question. At a time when several questions are being raised over safety in the Indian aviation sector, did the AAIB jump the gun by giving a clean chit a little too soon, or at least pointing the investigation in only one direction? Does Boeing, for instance, have a clean track record, or is there more to it than meets the eye?
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 2 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
Joining us now is, in fact, a whistleblower as far as Boeing is concerned. He's also, in fact, the executive director of the Foundation for Aviation Safety. Ed Pierson is with us this evening. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Pierson. What specific safety issues and human error trends did you begin to observe at the Boeing Renton 737 MAX factory in 2017, and what compelled you to escalate your concerns to your senior management?
Well, first of all, I just want to again put out the word that we want to share our condolences for these families. And then before I answer your question, let me just say that our primary concern is the ongoing safety of these airplanes and all the people, getting on these planes. So, my concerns have been well documented. We had manufacturing issues on the 737 program. It affected our quality control. We had issues with supply chain, lots of issues that were reported, and unfortunately, we think some of these issues are still occurring today.
Right. Also, after the Air India 787 Dreamliners crash, you had mentioned that your foundation is tracking a bothersome pattern of issues across Boeing fleets. Can you elaborate on these patterns that your organization has filed, or identified rather?
Yes. A lot of people have heard about the 2 MAX disasters that killed 346 people. There was supposedly a lot of fixes that went into that occurred to improve things, and yet we have been tracking quality control defects on the 737 MAX airplanes since they returned to service. And there's over 30 of these defects. These are engineering and manufacturing defects. These are known problems, and you have to ask yourself, how did this happen? And these defects, speak to rush production, employees that maybe not properly trained, potentially fatigued. So there's a lot of issues here, and we think it manifested itself in the Alaska accident, the Alaska 1282 blowout accident with the mid-aft door. So we're not confident that all the talk that's occurring at the top of the company is actually resulting in employees on the front lines, doing the work that they're capable of doing, but we know they're under tremendous pressure.
Absolutely. And when you requested a temporary shutdown of the factory in June 2018, what evidence of incidents made you believe that this action was urgent and was necessary? What was the response from the Boeing leadership at the time?
Well, back in 2018, I was a senior manager inside the factory, and my team and I had seen a lot of issues with our quality control reporting, our defect rates. We were seeing all these issues and, mistakes being made in the building of the plane. I attempted to get the general manager to shut down the plane because I felt that we were taking unnecessary risk. We had system failures, notably like electrical system failures that were occurring. A lot of our systems testing was being rushed. Some of it was being done outside the factory building on the flight line. So the main driver was concerned for the safety of the planes, and also even the people that were building the planes. There was a lot of safety issues that we were having. Again, it was due to the rush production.
Right. And what do you make of the preliminary investigation report of the Air India crash? Because the preliminary report by the AAIB notes that fuel cutoff switches for both engines went from run to cutoff within a second of each other, shutting down power right after takeoff. And we also have a small excerpt of the cockpit voice recordings that where the two pilots are talking to each other. One asks the other, did you shut it off? The other says, no, I did not. Now, how do you look at this based upon your experience about what are the factors that could lead to such a simultaneous dual engine shutdown during one of the most critical phases of flight? Because there appears to be a direction in which this report is headed.
Right. I mean, the report itself is lacking a lot of important information. There's not a detailed timeline of what actually happened. We don't really know exactly what the pilots were looking at. The language in the report certainly implicates the pilots, or at least infers that they, either deliberately or accidentally threw the switches. But, what's really lacking in the report is any discussion on potential system faults, anything that could have potentially caused the system to think that the switch had actually been moved, or mimic of movement of the switch. Electrical systems are very complicated. Electronic systems are very complicated. I'm certainly not an expert in those areas, but we need electrical engineers, and we need, aviation maintenance technicians and people that work with electronics and electrical systems to get involved in this, because there are situations where an electrical switch movement could look like it has happened when in fact it was a failure in the circuit. There could be some sort of a short circuit or stray voltage, and those things can happen. So we need to exhaust all those potential system failure problems first before we really try to even infer that the pilots did this.
Right, but did it seem to you like the report was attempting to rule out any system or maintenance design or fault with the aircraft of its engines, or even placing the blame on the cockpit action or any kind of miscommunication? Because from a safety perspective, how should investigators be interpreting such early conclusions without the risk of unjustly blaming the pilots before the final report?
Yeah, like I said, this report is lacking in a really important area, and that is, what else could have happened? What other possible system failures that could have occurred that could have caused the flight data recorder to indicate that the switch had been moved? It's not accurate to say that, just because the data recorder said there was a switch movement, that actually happened. I mean, switches, like I said, it can look like switches have been moved when in fact there's some sort of electronic failure, or software failure, or electrical failure. Right. So it's really premature and it's the point we want to make is this report needs to come out with some, it needs to be expedited. They need to get this information out as soon as possible to share it with as many people, as many experts as they can to look at this problem. And right now it's a very incomplete report, and we're kind of disappointed with that right now.
Right. And what steps do you believe that Boeing and regulators should immediately take to address these patterns and restore public trust after this crash?
Well, number one, you don't just come out like the FAA did and the Boeing did and said everything is basically fine with the airplanes. They're saying that, and we saw this after the first MAX disaster in 2018, the same behavior. What they need to do is work with the urgency to really take that information and actually share it. We believe they should share it with the public, because now you get all these other experts out there who can weigh in, and you can identify and analyze potential situations and discount certain things, eliminate things, and really focus. So, building trust isn't just breadcrumbing this information out, like one of my colleagues said, just giving little pieces of information out. They need to put it all out there and be honest. And so that's what's really frustrating, and we think that that's necessary to build trust.
Right. There's also a new set of information that's come to light. There's a right to information reply, of course, that's today brought out the fact that at least 65 in-flight engine shutdowns were reported in India since 2020, and this is data that's come from the DGCA office, which is the regulator. So do you believe that this number indicates a systemic gap in safety management for Indian carriers, or are they within normal industry trends for a large and growing fleet in your view?
You know, I'm not really, I really can't speak to that. I haven't looked at that information. I'm not an expert in that area, so I really unfortunately can't answer that.
All right. Let me also ask you this, that given the media attention on pilot actions, there are early reports and, how this could have a possible chilling effect. How could this impact upon open reporting of errors, safety lapses and best practices that should investigative authorities, should they be adopting in maintaining fairness and transparency during such high-profile inquiries? Should there be an external observer apart from ICAO, like the demand by the pilots' body in your view?
Well, a couple things. Number one, I think we should have cameras inside the flight station so we can, remove a lot of the doubt of what actually happens. That's number one. Number two, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO Annex 13, based in Montreal, Canada, we have actually approached them with information about the 737 MAX disasters that we feel is being withheld, even though that those accident reports have been completed. There's information that the National Transportation Safety Board Chair Jennifer Homedy has been withholding, and we tried to get ICAO to even schedule a meeting with us. The Secretary General of ICAO wouldn't even talk to us. We've been trying for months to try to point out that this trust that has to occur between different countries in these accident investigations. When you issue reports that are really inadequate and lacking a huge amount of information and inferring that pilots made mistakes without looking at potential system failures, maintenance failures, whatever, it's really irresponsible. And so we think that ICAO Secretary General Salazar needs to explain, what the standards are and how this is supposed to work. And like I said, even in the case of the MAX crashes, we saw a similar pattern after that first crash. Blame the pilots. The FAA issues this maintenance message, or this MOM, they call it, Memorandum of Operations, I think it is, to alert them. It's like all the things that we saw before are happening again here, and it's very concerning. I don't know what to say other than to build trust, we need ICAO to help these countries, all these countries, work better together, and everybody else is just kind of watching this thing, watching this thing develop.
Right.
It's very frustrating.
Right. The AAIB report also mentions the 2018 SAIB advisory that was issued by the FAA. It was not, of course, mandatory at that point of time, but it does note that there could be some potential issues with the fuel switch locking mechanism. Now we're looking at various airlines, whether it's Etihad, whether it's Singapore Airlines or several others, who've started looking into this. In India as well, the DGCA, which is a regulator, has ordered that all airlines have to look into this, particularly the affected fleet of Boeing, and have to get back within the period of a week. Do you feel that if this was something, or as an exercise, if this was done much earlier, perhaps we could have looked at, at least ruling out the possibility of this being one of the reasons for this crash?
Well, let's just say that we have been watching how the FAA handles it's called the Continued Operational Safety Program. And basically, if a defect is identified in the airplane, the FAA works with the manufacturer to issue instructions to the airlines how to fix the defect. And we have seen over and over again the FAA issuing service bulletins, which many cases are voluntary, when they should be issuing airworthiness directives, which are legal orders to say you must do this. And so that special bulletin that came out, sounds like it should have been an actual airworthiness directive. And again, you have to understand that looking at the switch, a visual inspection of the switch and the spring-loaded activation, under that switch is wires and other types of systems, the signals that are transferred back and forth. So you can't just say that the switch says this, so it's automatically means that it was moved from run to cut off back to run. It's more complicated than that. So, the going out and inspecting the switches is almost like, the horse ran out of the barn kind of a thing. It's like, no kidding. They need to do more than that, and they need to get into a much more detailed analysis of all the possible faults that could have occurred.
Right. And Mr. Pierson, you're not the only one who's involved in this work as a whistleblower. We've seen Sam Salehpour, a former Boeing engineer, who reported about structural issues. There was also John Barnett, who was found tragically dead later. Why do you think there's still inaction after multiple alarm bells that have gone off in this case?
Well, I'm not saying there has been complete inaction. The vast majority of the people at the Boeing company and these government agencies are doing everything they can to do their jobs properly. There's leadership failures here at senior levels, and there are people who are taking shortcuts because they're trying to appease somebody else, or they just feel like they can't push back. What we really need is people to recognize, even if you've made changes, and all the talk doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually happened. And so when we talk about raising production rates, when we still have problems, that's kind of irresponsible. That is irresponsible. So I think that most of the people at the Boeing company and at the government agencies in the U.S. and India, I think that everybody trying to do the best they can, but we have to slow down and do things right. We just can't keep rushing through this and thinking that everything's going to be fine.
So, Ed, if I can just go to end this interview, you're saying that Boeing could still potentially be sacrificing safety at the altar of profitability. The
Boeing company and government oversight has in fact allowed poor quality to go through the system, and we need to regain that quality. And even all the talk and stuff, it's measured in what actually happens in these planes. But as we pointed out, that report, that 737 on MAX, of those known engineering and manufacturing defects that are still out on those planes, if people want to see more, they just go to the reports tab on our website on the Foundation for Aviation Safety.org, and the first report, and so we think that the government agencies need to do a lot more. We think that believe it or not, we believe that our Department of Justice needs to investigate and find out why certain individuals are making certain decisions. People know stuff that, they didn't share, and we still think that there's withholding of information that's critical. So I don't know how to describe it other than, the public needs to pay, attention and demand that the law enforcement authorities do their job. They investigate issues, and they don't just downplay them. These safety accidents and incidents that are occurring, they need to investigate.
Right.
So there's a lot here. It's not a single solution kind of a situation.
All right, Ed Pierson, I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking to us here at Times Now.
Sure, thank you.
The News Hour at 10.